Dystopia warning, obviously. Now, I've had a lot of people barging into my comment sections on completely unrelated videos, demanding that I talk about the winter fuel allowance. Videos in which I'm outlining, foreign interference in our politics, aiding and abetting people like Reform and the Tories who are going frighteningly MAGA. Some of them are even accusing me of freezing pensioners and being responsible for Labour's policies, which is exactly what you want to hear when you're burnt out after 4 years of documenting daily every instance of corruption and criminality from the Conservative Party at great personal cost to your own mental health. When I was, and remain, just a regular person that was calling out what I saw to be a massive injustice. Because the usual suspects are pushing this, and sadly a lot of people are falling for what is essentially a Daily Mail headline. As is tradition, because people don't learn anything or think for themselves, and they get their information from Facebook, which is inundated with Russian and other foreign interference, yeah. Not just that, but the gall of right-wing pundits like the GBB's morons and the Tories claiming now that they're looking out for the vulnerable when they've spent the last 14 years killing the vulnerable off. I'm going to outline early doors before I proceed and offer some further information on this, my view on the winter fuel allowance. In principle, I have absolutely no issue whatsoever with means testing this benefit. I do not think it should be universal. I don't think that extremely poor people who are paying their taxes but having to use universal credit to top up their wages because they're so low, who are using food banks, should be contributing to millionaires and expats sunning it up on the Costa del Sol, getting an extra couple of £100 of pocket money. What I do have a problem with is the fact that the threshold is so low, too low, which will result in people falling through the cracks. Labour needs to raise that lower threshold urgently. Another issue that I have with this policy, and another reason why I'm not entirely in favour of it, again, don't mind the principle of means testing, but there's massive flaws with this policy. And that is the fact that they are going for, inexplicably, something that could constitute austerity before targeting the richest in society via capital gains tax and inheritance tax. Now, they are already closing the non-dom loopholes and they are taxing private schools. Where they've missed a trick here is with the threshold being so low and not automatically making sure that the poorest who are in receipt of pension credit get that pension credit. They should be automatically enrolled to get that benefit. In fact, anybody that needs welfare should be automatically enrolled to receive it. They shouldn't have to guess whether or not they're entitled to help. However, it's incredibly clear that the Tories have salted the earth on purpose. And despite people denying it, mostly people on the right that are essentially a Tory propaganda outlet, there was a multi-billion-pound black hole in our economy. I just don't think it was in their interests, or the poorest people's interests who might lose out, to start here. However, quite a lot has pissed me off, to put it mildly, about how all of this is being reported. You see that banner there? That was happening under the Conservative Party. Under 14 years of Conservative misrule, the people that have suffered the most have been young people and young families, facing Dickensian levels of poverty, as have the poorest older people. But let me make one thing clear. The age bracket that consistently voted Conservative were the over 65s, in quite alarming numbers. The same applies to those that voted for Brexit. Both the Tories and the Leave result took away vital freedoms for millions of young people, made all of us poorer. And this is a demographic that is on average 9 times richer than the average wealth of people in the 30 to 34 age group, yeah. I gave up 2.5 precious years of my life in my 30s to keep that age range safe during COVID, because it was the right thing to do. Unlike the Conservative Party that killed tens of thousands of them in care homes in the first 3 months of COVID alone. This sacrifice cost me and my friends greatly, especially the ones that died from suicide. I was also forced to spend 4 years of my life desperately trying to fight to help get rid of the immoral bastards that over 65s consistently voted for, only for them to then assist Farage in his resurgence with reform. A betrayal akin to Brexit 2.0. I want to make one thing very clear. If you're in this age bracket and you did not vote Tory or Reform, I'm on your side. If you're in this age group and you voted for Tory or Reform or Leave, I'm not putting any of my efforts into assisting you. Because you've destroyed the lives of millions, yeah, and made us all worse off and taken away our rights. Now, as I said, this age bracket has consistently voted Tory, despite Tories literally putting in their manifesto in July they would make further cuts to welfare, including to disabled people, including kids in poverty, and further destroy our dead public services to give tax breaks to the richest people, i.e. over 65s, that a vast proportion of which are millionaires, despite millions of workers and kids being in abject poverty, a broken NHS, no social care, both of which really disproportionately affect older people, kids knifing each other at alarming rates because their outreach services have been taken away, overflowing prisons, crumbling schools, etc. All of these things hitting the poorest of all ages. Where was the outcry from the rich OAPs when the elderly were forced to ride the bus in an attempt to keep warm because of him? When warm banks were set up and local charities and community centres had to pull together because there was no funding from the government to keep people alive and stop them freezing to death. All this happened under the Conservatives for years as a choice. Yet amongst all the cuts to benefits, pensions increased year on year, whereas wages for NHS staff, teachers, police, firefighters didn't even raise with inflation. I reserve my sympathies for those that did not vote Conservative. Those whose lives, livelihoods, futures, hopes of owning a home and living a normal life were destroyed by those that did. Whereas over 65s were comfortably able to buy a house and support a family and one parent staying at home on a single income. Yet their voting choices, statistically, took that right away from other people. They say they worked hard, yeah, I'm sure they did, but under much easier conditions. Yet they called us entitled, when they're the ones kicking off about the first concession that they've had to make in well over 14 years. The Tories have lavished them with benefits, the richer ones, because they're the Tories' voter base, the grey vote. Poor older Tories, well, they were just turkeys voting for Christmas. And the only reason that the Tories are kicking off now is because, as I said, older Tories are their voter base, and then there's also the fact that they need to deflect from the fact that they've absolutely fucked our country to pieces. That's why they pulled out all the stops to make sure that older people could vote when they introduced voter ID that disenfranchised everybody else. An older person could take a crude sketch of themselves drawn by their grandchild to the polling booth and be accepted, along with rail cards, whereas young people's rail cards were broadly not accepted. Why? Because young people don't vote Tory. They just have their rights taken away by those in the older demographics that do. And this is all over the news. Labour's freezing pensioners. But when the Tories were doing it, the only people that were reporting on it were the Mirror. What Labour is doing is not ideological austerity. It's a far cry from the days of Cameron. But the media was silent about that. Silent about the 300,000 plus excess deaths from austerity and people literally dying of despair. Silent about people like Sunak, who benefited from the financial crash, and then people like David Cameron forcing us to pay it back. My priority are those that did not choose Johnson, Sunak, Cameron, Brexit, and all the shit that came with it that destroyed Britain. My priority is that the people that suffered under them are not forgotten, as their crimes are whitewashed, and literally all the focus is put on Labour means testing a universal benefit that even millionaires like Rod Stewart receives. Where was the outcry for little babies growing up in freezing cold houses and having their lungs not developing properly? This was happening under the last government. Now, nothing that I'm saying is ageism or anti-older people. It's counting. It's our recent history. It's about voting history, statistics, facts. Hashtag not all older people, because I know a lot of older people that didn't vote for this and I'm on their side. But millions did. Nothing that I am saying is in defence of Labour. I don't defend every aspect of this policy, purely the concept of means testing. I do not make political figures my heroes, nor do I defend things that I think are objectively wrong, like any form of austerity, because austerity kills the poor. It's a form of covert democide, and there's no excuse or reason for any government to implement it. And at the end, I'll reiterate my position on the winter fuel allowance. Pension credit and welfare payment should be automatically applied to those that need it. The threshold should be raised. Labour should be targeting the richest in society as a priority. Things like inheritance tax, capital gains tax. Tax the fucking bankers. Tax the corporations. Don't come for regular people first. And because that is not necessarily what is happening at this point, I'm not in favour of this policy. My concern are those that can't afford to go without it, and the poorest in society facing yet more hardship. When, as far as I'm concerned, that's completely unnecessary. But equally, I have a massive problem with our recent past being whitewashed and those that caused the carnage claiming that they give a shit about the vulnerable, because they don't. I mean, there's plenty of problems that we've all had to deal with. The cost of crisis living under the Conservatives. But unfortunately, broadly, one demographic put us here. I just feel sorry for the people in that demographic who didn't, who, like the rest of us, are having to suffer the consequences.